Canadian hero Terry Fox may be rolling over in his grave tonight after cross-country charity runner Kris Sims, who's trying to raise money for an Edmonton Children's Hospital, was arrested by Quebec police. Here's a man in motion for a great cause, getting the gears from the cops for following in Terry Fox's footsteps. 23 years old, he's just a bit older than Terry was when he lost his life to raise awareness about the cancer that killed him. Meanwhile, other 23-year-olds have been running amok in that very same province of Quebec, breaking the law, disrupting the province over a modest tuition hike. The whole thing is out of whack, out of kilter. Joining us now for more is Sun News reporter Kris Sims. Kris, Canadians think this is beyond nutty, and beyond that, of course, it's insulting and highly offensive.
They're just totally outraged, Charles. If you look at the comment section on the websites, and if you read the letters that I'm sure all media, frankly, are getting on this story, they're just disgusted by it. How could the police do this to someone who is running for charity, obviously running for charity? Like you pointed out, he had an RV slowly following behind him, probably with the four-way flashers on, just as Terry Fox did. And I must point out that Terry Fox actually ran into this exact problem when he went into Quebec. He, of course, was loved but a little well known in Newfoundland because he was just starting his run back then. But when he actually crossed into Quebec, same deal. The police stopped him and said, "You can't run on the Trans-Canada Highway. You need to run on the secondary highway." Terry Fox, being a very mild-mannered and an agreeable person, agreed. And for a big section in Quebec, he ran along a secondary highway. Otherwise, they would have charged him too. So it's really, and he's truly running in Terry Fox's footsteps, not in the same way that he was suffering from cancer, but Curtis is running to raise money for children, I'm sure, who are suffering from cancer and all sorts of horrible ailments. All this money would go to an Edmonton Children's Hospital, but that fell on deaf ears. And what I find really touching is that Mr. Hargrove is still trying to say, don't let this be a hatred of Quebec thing. He's deleting all the anti-Quebec things on his Facebook. He's just trying to raise money and do the right thing. But I must say, the same sort of thing befell our hero, Terry Fox. And I really can't think of somebody that Canadians universally love more. We have so many statues here in the National Capital Region, Charles. Most people just walk past them. But there's one very, very special one, and it's of Terry Fox. It's directly across the street from Parliament Hill. And Charles, people from around the world, routinely, you see them around this statue. They're draping flags around him all the time. On Canada Day, he's festooned with maple leaves and people hugging the statue to take their picture with him. Terry Fox runs are known around the world, and yet the same thing happened to him back in the day.
We have lots of heroes in this country. We're not aware of most of them. That's why we make such a big deal about Canada Day and Remembrance Day, so we can educate people, educate ourselves, frankly, on who our heroes are. But one hero that I think virtually every Canadian is aware of, and it's important that we are, is of Terry Fox. And you mentioned the statue in Ottawa, and of course, there's also the great statue of Terry Fox, where he had to unfortunately stop his run near Thunder Bay. And it's very, very hard to drive to Thunder Bay without wanting to stop off, and you do, and you have people with their kids and taking pictures of their kids with the Terry Fox statue, and you can tell that moms and dads, Canadian moms and dads, are telling the Terry Fox story to their children. It matters to us a lot. Look, Curtis, it's like so many of these kinds of Quebec versus Canada, Canada versus Quebec stories. Curtis wants to make sure there's no anti-Quebec vitriol on the Facebook page, and we understand that. But we've seen this before. We want to make sure that nothing anti-Quebec is said on that Facebook page. But does anybody doubt that much of this was an anti-Canadian statement on the part of Quebec police?
I don't think anybody doubts that, frankly, Charles. Every other province would have offered this guy a police escort. The picture we're all familiar with Terry Fox, and it's okay to draw on him because Curtis Hargrove has said that is his ultimate hero. He's the reason why he's trying to mimic this run, even though he personally is well and sound. The picture a lot of us have in our mind is, of course, Terry running along the side of the Trans-Canada Highway, and behind him is an RV, and behind him you can see the lights of police cars because they're slowly following to make sure that he was safe. And contrast that, the stark contrast with Quebec pulling over and saying, "Hey, you, get off the road." well, no, I can't, because otherwise it'll become a secondary highway, thus a secondary run. I won't have the same sort of profile. I won't raise enough money for children. He said, I don't really care, apparently, what your reasons are. If you don't get off this highway and go onto the secondary one, you're going to go to jail. And Mr. Hargrove chose to go to jail instead of going on to a secondary highway. And I think most people know that it's just this nasty sentiment that happens to exist there, and it's too bad. Apparently also he was fined $52 for illegally parking on the Trans-Canada Highway. That was his RV, and since it was moving slowly and he had to stop, I'm assuming because the police stopped him, he also got a parking ticket to boot. So when he goes in to defend himself in September, he'll also have to cough up extra money for that parking ticket that he received in Quebec.
And some punks vandalizing because they didn't like the Canadian flag. Kris, let me just pull something right out of my imagination. I hope this doesn't have to happen, but maybe someday it will. And I just wonder how Canadians would respond. What if the next Curtis Hargrove decides to start in Newfoundland and to do it right up until Quebec? In Quebec, just jump in the van and drive to Ontario, and at the Quebec-Ontario border in Ontario, start running again. Do you think the country would support that, would understand it and support it, or do you think he'd be in trouble with all of the high priests and priestesses of political correctness saying that this was a very rude and un-Canadian thing to do?
Oh, of course, the high priests and priestesses of political correctness would be horribly offended. You know, their hearts would be aflutter and they'd be clutching their chests over it. But I think real Canadians would just be deeply saddened. I mean, it's very sad to think that somebody who has such a noble cause, who has such a pure heart and pure mind when it comes to this sort of issue, would have to do something like that. And actually, to bring up Terry Fox again, it seems that we're channeling him today, he was accused once of by a columnist in Vancouver, a BC columnist, of driving through Quebec. And I think maybe the columnist had gotten confused with what happened with the police officers and, you know, just wrote this nasty little column without actually knowing the facts. Apparently nothing hurt him more. Nothing hurt Terry Fox more than the idea that somebody would think that he would skip Quebec, drive through Quebec. He said, this is all our country. I love the entire country. I would never do something like that. Why would I skip an entire province and cheat people that way? So it's terribly sad. But I think a little part of us might understand, because it's just, you have to go through this whenever you're trying to do something nice. I'd be curious to know if other charity runners have run into the same problem. If once they hit that Quebec border, whether they're coming from the west and crossing over at Gatineau, or they're coming from the east and they're crossing over from Newfoundland, if they have to go onto a secondary highway in Quebec. It's
a good question. I've got to hit the road, but I just in 10 seconds or less, Kris Sims, how many people who are speakers for Quebec, whether they're politicians or others, how many high-profile Quebecers have spoken out against what happened here?
I haven't heard one yet. To be fair, I've read several articles on it. Maybe it's a little early in the controversy. The houses aren't in session right now, so I'll give them a bit of grace. But we haven't heard anything yet. And I think the best way people can express themselves with this is to make a donation, even if it's very small. Make a donation to this cause. And
run, Curtis, run.
Exactly.
We got to run, Kris. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it,
Charles.
as always.